our moving pantry, we searched for fresh water, the source of all life. We adapted to the rhythm of the seasons, moving to warmer lands in winter and cooler regions in summer. When the berries were gone, or the game moved on, so did we. Staying in one place meant starvation and danger, but leaving, moving forward, that meant life. The land wasn't something you could own. It was a shared highway, a temporary resource to be crossed, used, and then left behind for others. Nothing tied our ancestors to a single spot on the map. Their entire world was a journey without a final destination. This nomadic way of life, this constant dance with nature, lasted for tens of thousands of years, shaping our bodies and our minds. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the rhythm of human existence began to change. A revolutionary idea took root. What if we didn't have to chase our food? What if we could make it grow, right where we were? This was the dawn of agriculture. The simple act of planting a seed and waiting for it to sprout changed everything. Waiting began to replace wandering. Suddenly, one specific place started to matter more than all the others combined. This shift from hunter-gatherer to farmer wasn't just a change in diet. It was a complete rewiring of human society. Settling down meant we could build more permanent structures, things designed to last for generations. No longer were we limited to what we could carry on our backs. We started accumulating possessions, creating art, and developing tools that were more complex and specialized. Communities grew larger and more stable. Instead of small, mobile bands, we began to form villages, and then towns, and eventually, sprawling cities. But this new way of life came with its own set of challenges. Living in one place meant dealing with waste, the rapid spread of disease, and the new concept of property disputes. Who owned the land? Who owned the harvest? These questions led to the creation of rules, laws, and systems of governance. Social hierarchies began to form, with leaders, soldiers, and laborers. The need to protect resources and territory led to organized warfare on a scale never seen before. It was a trade-off. We gained security from the elements, but created new conflicts among ourselves. The psychological impact was just as profound. Our relationship with time itself was altered. Nomads lived in the present, focused on the immediate needs of the day. Farmers had to think in seasons, planning months or even years ahead. They had to have faith that their hard work would pay off in a future harvest. This long-term thinking is the foundation of every major project humanity has ever undertaken, from building pyramids to landing on the moon. The decision to stay put unlocked a new level of human potential and cooperation. So, when we look around at our modern world our towering skyscrapers, our intricate networks of roads, our entire global civilization, it all traces back to that one monumental decision. The moment our ancestors chose to stop wandering and put down roots. They traded the freedom of the open plains for the stability of a single plot of land. They ended a journey that had lasted millennia, and in doing so, they started a new one, the journey of civilization. And that is how the end of endless travel reshaped humanity forever. The first topic is a world without homes. Imagine a world without a place to call home. Not a world of homelessness as we know it today, but a world where the very concept of a permanent home simply doesn't exist. This was the reality for our earliest ancestors. It's a reality that shaped humanity in ways we rarely consider. Let's take a journey back in time, to a world without walls, without doors, and without the comfort of a familiar place to return to at the end of the day. Before the first hut was built, before the first foundation was laid, humans were wanderers, on a planet that was both a provider and a constant threat. Life was a continuous journey, a nomadic existence dictated by the seasons, the migration of animals, and the ripening of plants. Their shelters were fleeting, temporary solutions to immediate problems, a cluster of branches woven together to break the wind, a stretched animal hide to shed the rain, or the discovered safety of a natural cave. These were not homes, they were stopovers, places to rest for a night, or perhaps a few weeks, before the journey continued. The thought of staying, of settling down, was as foreign as the idea of flying to the moon. Think about what that means for daily life. There were no villages with winding streets, no towering structures built to last for generations. The landscape was untouched by permanent human construction. The world was a canvas of nature, and our ancestors moved through it like a breeze, leaving almost no trace. Imagine waking up each morning, not in a familiar room, but in a new spot, with a new view, new sounds, and new smells. Your entire world was what you could see and hear right in that moment. The past was a series of abandoned campsites, and the future was an unknown path stretching out before you. This constant movement had a profound impact on what people owned. In a life on the go, every single item had to be justified. Possessions were a burden. You only carried what was absolutely essential for survival. A sharpened stone tool, a water skin, a spear, a basket for gathering. Everything else was a luxury you couldn't afford, not because of money, but because of weight. A beautiful rock, an interesting piece of wood, these things might be admired for a moment, but they were left behind. The modern idea of accumulating possessions, of filling a house with things, was non-existent. Your wealth was your skill, your knowledge of the land, and the strength of your own 2 feet. This minimalist existence wasn't a lifestyle choice. It was the only way to live. Social structures were just as fluid as their living arrangements. People lived in small, tight-knit groups, likely extended families. But these groups were not static. They were adaptable, merging with other groups when resources were plentiful or splitting apart when food became scarce. Survival was a team sport, and your teammates could change. Alliances were formed and dissolved based on immediate needs. If a hunt required more people, groups would come together. If a drought made a region barren, they would go their separate ways to cover more ground. Leadership in this world was not a fixed position. There was no king, no chief with permanent authority. A person might be followed for their skill in hunting, their knowledge of edible plants, or their wisdom in finding water. But this leadership was situational. The best hunter might lead the chase, but the oldest and most experienced member might guide the group's migration. Decisions were made for the here and now, focusing on the immediate challenges of survival. There was little concept of long-term planning, of 5-year plans or generational goals. The goal was to make it through the day, to find enough food, to stay safe from predators, and to endure the weather. The future was tomorrow, and it would bring its own set of problems to solve. Perhaps the most alien concept for us to grasp is the absence of the idea of coming home. We say it all the time, "I'm going home. I can't wait to get home." It's a fundamental part of our emotional landscape. For our ancestors, this feeling didn't exist. There was no single point of return. The end of the day didn't mean returning to a safe, familiar space. It meant creating a new, temporary safe space, wherever the group happened to stop. Safety didn't come from thick walls or a locked door. It came from vigilance, from the keen eyes and ears of the group, from the crackling fire that kept nocturnal predators at bay. Their sense of security was internal and communal, not architectural. This world was incredibly uncertain. Every day was a gamble. But this uncertainty bred a remarkable adaptability. These early humans were masters of improvisation. They learned to read the sky, the tracks in the dirt, the subtle changes in the wind. They possessed an intimate knowledge of their environment that we have almost completely lost. They didn't belong to one specific place. In a way, they belonged everywhere and nowhere at the same time. The entire world was their territory, a vast, shared space without fences or borders. Now, let's fast forward a bit. What changed? What changed? What sparked the revolution that led to the world we know today? The shift from a nomadic life to a settled one is one of the most significant turning points in human history. It didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, gradual process that unfolded over thousands of years in different parts of the world. The key was agriculture. The discovery that you could plant seeds and harvest crops meant that for the first time, you didn't have to follow the food. You could make the food come to you. This was Suddenly, there was a reason to stay in one place. You had to tend to your crops, protect them from animals, and wait for the harvest. This simple act of planting a seed tethered people to the land. And once you were tethered, you started to build things that were meant to last. You built sturdier shelters because you knew you'd be using them for a long time. You built fences to protect your crops and your domesticated animals. You built granaries to store your surplus food. And with surplus food came a population explosion. A settled lifestyle could support more people in a smaller area. Small, wandering bands grew into larger, permanent villages. These villages became the first towns, and eventually, the first cities. With settlements came new social structures. The need to manage resources, organize labor for farming, and defend the settlement led to more formal systems of governance. Permanent leaders, priests, and soldiers emerged. Society became more complex, more hierarchical. The concept of ownership also transformed completely. Now that people weren't constantly on the move, they could accumulate things. Pottery, furniture, more elaborate tools, and personal adornments became common. Land itself became the most valuable possession. Who owned which field? Where did one family's property end and another's begin? These questions led to laws, disputes, and the need for records. The world was being carved up, divided, and owned. And of course, the idea of home was born. The second topic is survival through movement. Imagine a world without walls, without borders, without a single place to call a permanent home. For early humans, this wasn't a fantasy. It was the key to survival. Movement was their greatest tool, their ultimate superpower. In a world defined by constant change and immediate danger, staying still was a death sentence. Think about it. The massive herds of mammoths and bison they depended on were always on the move, chasing the seasons. To eat, our ancestors had to follow. When a rivet, their lifeblood, suddenly dried up under a scorching sun, they couldn't just wait for rain. They had to pack up and find a new source of water. When a rival tribe grew too close for comfort, or a fearsome predator like a saber-toothed cat started learning their hunting routes, the only smart move was to disappear, to become a ghost on the landscape. This constant motion wasn't just about escaping threats or finding food. It was a strategy for resilience. By never staying in one place for too long, they avoided depleting the local resources. They didn't overhunt the game, they didn't strip the land of all its edible plants, and they didn't pollute their own water sources. This nomadic lifestyle also acted as a natural quarantine. If a sickness broke out within a small group, moving on could prevent it from becoming a full-blown epidemic that would wipe everyone out. Movement was a preventative medicine, a way to stay one step ahead of disease, starvation, and predators. Of course, this life was anything but easy. It was physically grueling. Every single day was a workout. Imagine the energy it took to track animals 4 miles, to carry your few essential possessions, your tools, and sometimes your children, across rugged terrain. There were no rest days, no vacations. Survival was a full-time job, and the work was hard. The physical demands were immense. Their bodies were honed by necessity, sculpted by the endless walking, running, climbing, and carrying. Every muscle was earned, every calorie was precious. But with this hardship came an incredible, profound freedom. A freedom we can barely comprehend today. They were not tied to any land, not bound by any king or government. The entire planet was their backyard. If they didn't like the neighbors, they could leave. If the climate grew too cold, they could walk south. This freedom was absolute, but it was paired with absolute uncertainty. Where would the next meal come from? Would they find shelter before the storm hit? Was a predator lurking just over the next hill? This constant dance between freedom and uncertainty is what fundamentally shaped us. This uncertainty was a powerful motivator. It pushed our ancestors to innovate, to develop better tools, to communicate more effectively, and to strengthen their social bonds. They had to rely on each other completely. The group, the tribe, the family, that was their safety net in a world without any. Sharing knowledge was critical. An elder remembering a hidden spring during a drought could save everyone. A sharp-eyed hunter spotting a weakness in a large animal could feed the group for a week. Cooperation wasn't just a nice idea. It was the very fabric of their existence. This era of perpetual motion created a human being that was adaptable, resourceful, and incredibly tough. But over thousands of generations, that deep-seated need for security, the wariness from constant uncertainty, began to plant a new seed in the human mind, the desire for something more predictable, more stable. What if we didn't have to chase our food? What if our food could stay in one place? What if we could build a home that we didn't have to abandon? This question, born from millennia of wandering, would lead to the single greatest transformation in human history, the agricultural revolution. It was the moment we began to trade our freedom of movement for the security of settlement. We started to experiment with planting seeds, domesticating animals. We chose to stay put, and with that choice, everything changed. Settling down allowed for the accumulation of surplus. For the first time, we could produce more food than we needed for immediate survival. This surplus was a game. It meant not everyone had to be a farmer or a hunter. Some people could become artisans, priests, soldiers, and leaders. Villages began to swell into towns, and towns into the first cities. With cities came new social structures, hierarchies, laws, and the concept of property. The world of our nomadic ancestors, a world of open plains and shared resources, was rapidly vanishing, replaced by a world of walls, fields, and ownership. We gained so much: the security of a full granary, the time to develop art, science, and writing. We built monuments that would stand for millennia, testaments to our newfound permanence. But we also lost something. We lost that absolute freedom, that intimate connection with the wild earth. we introduced new problems: social inequality, organized warfare over land and resources, and the rapid spread of diseases in crowded cities. Our diets narrowed, and our bodies, no longer needing to endure constant travel, began to change. So when we look back at our wandering ancestors, it's easy to see their lives as primitive and harsh. But they possessed a resilience and a freedom that we, in our comfortable, settled world, have largely forgotten. Their story is written in our DNA. That ancient urge to explore, to see what's over the next horizon, is still with us. It's the legacy of 100,000 years of movement. They were the original explorers, the ultimate survivors, who walked the earth so that one day we could build our own. Their journey didn't just ensure our survival, it laid the very foundation for the world we know today. The third topic is the first reasons to stay. Have you ever wondered why we live in houses, in towns, in cities, instead of just wandering the earth forever, for hundreds of thousands of years? That's exactly what our ancestors did. They were nomads, constantly on the move, following the seasons and the herds. So what changed? What was the very first reason humanity decided to stop walking and start staying? The answer, in a single word, is food. But the story is so much more fascinating than that. Imagine a world without grocery stores, without refrigerators, without even a pantry. Every single meal was a question mark. You ate what you could find, where you could find it. Life was a relentless search for berries, nuts, roots, and the next successful hunt. Your survival depended entirely on your movement. If the animals migrated, you migrated with them. If the fruit trees in one valley were picked clean, you moved to the next. Staying in one place for too long meant starving. This was the fundamental rule of human existence for almost our entire history. It was a life of incredible freedom, but also constant uncertainty. But then, something revolutionary happened. A discovery so profound it would completely rewrite the rules of survival. It probably started by accident. A handful of seeds dropped near a campsite. A few weeks later, a tiny green sprout pushes through the soil. Someone notices, they watch it grow. Eventually, they connect the dots. The seed they dropped became the plant they could eat. This seemingly small observation was the spark that ignited the agricultural revolution. Humans learned that they didn't just have to find food. They could create it. They could take a seed, put it in the ground, and with a little water and a lot of patience, it would become a source of sustenance. This was a monumental shift in thinking. Food was no longer just a reward for movement. It could be a reward for staying put. This new way of life demanded a virtue that was previously less important: patience. Farming isn't a quick process. You can't just plant a seed and eat the fruit the next day. Crops need time to grow, to ripen. Weeks, months, an entire season might pass. For a nomadic people accustomed to immediate returns, this was a huge adjustment. Leaving now meant something different. It wasn't just abandoning a temporary camp. It was abandoning your future food source. It was abandoning all the work you had put in. For the very first time in human history, staying in one place made more sense than leaving. So people started to return to the same spots year after year. The temporary camps started to last a little longer. Instead of just a few days, maybe it was a few weeks, then a few months. Why? Because that's where their crops were. That's where their future was literally taking root. This created a new set of challenges and innovations. If you're going to have a surplus of grain after a harvest, you can't just carry it all on your back. You need somewhere to store it. This led to the development of pottery and granaries technologies designed to protect food from pests, moisture, and thieves. Storage became a cornerstone of these new, semi-permanent settlements. With a more reliable food source, people had more time. They weren't spending every waking moment hunting and gathering. This downtime was a catalyst for innovation. Tools became more specialized and sophisticated. We see the emergence of polished stone axes for clearing land, sickles for harvesting grain, and grinding stones for processing it into flour. Life was becoming more predictable. You knew that if you planted your seeds and tended your fields, you would likely have food in a few months. But this predictability came with a new kind of burden: responsibility. These fields, these precious sources of life, had to be protected. They were vulnerable to grazing animals, to rival groups, to the forces of nature. Your food supply, your community's entire future, had to be guarded around the clock. The era of carefree wandering was slowly coming to an end. The responsibilities of the harvest tied people to the land in a way nothing had before. Endless travel became less necessary, and, in some ways, less possible. The first settlements weren't just a collection of huts. They were a commitment to the land, to a charter, and to a new way of living. This new, settled lifestyle had a profound impact on social structures. In a nomadic group, everyone is a generalist. Everyone participates in finding food. But in a farming village, specialization can emerge. Some people might be better at making tools, others at building shelters, and others at managing the crops. This division of labor led to more complex social hierarchies. Suddenly, the concept of ownership became much more important. Who owns the land? Who owns the harvest? Who owns the stored grain? These were questions our nomadic ancestors never had to ask. These questions led to the first rules, the first laws, and the first forms of governance. And think about the population. A nomadic lifestyle can only support a small, mobile group. You can only have as many children as you can carry. But in a settled village with a stable food supply, you can support a much larger population. Families grew bigger. Villages expanded. The human population began to boom in a way it never had before. These growing communities became hubs of trade and cultural exchange. People weren't just sharing food. They were sharing ideas, technologies, and stories. The first villages were the crucibles, where human culture as we know it was forged. This shift wasn't a clean break. For thousands of years, many groups practiced a mix of farming and foraging. They might plant a crop and then go on a seasonal hunt, returning later for the harvest. The transition was messy, gradual, and different in every part of the world. And it wasn't always a clear improvement. Early farmers often had a less varied diet than their hunter-gatherer cousins, leading to nutritional deficiencies. They were also more susceptible to famine if a single crop failed. And living in close quarters meant diseases could spread like wildfire. Life became, in some ways, harder and more laborious. So why did we stick with it? Because agriculture offered one thing that hunting and gathering never could: the potential for a surplus, the ability to produce more food than you immediately need. This surplus is the foundation of civilization. It's what allows for specialization. It's what feeds soldiers, priests, artisans, and kings. Without the surplus created by those first farmers, we wouldn't have cities, writing, governments, or the complex world we live in today. It all comes back to that one simple, revolutionary idea: planting a seed and choosing to stay. From that single decision, everything else follows. The need for storage, the development of new tools, the rise of social structures, the population explosion, and the birth of complex societies. It was the first, and perhaps most important, reason that we stopped our endless wandering and began to build the world we now call home. The journey from nomad to villager was one of the most significant transformations in our history, and it was all set in motion by the simple act of agriculture. It was the first powerful reason to stay. The fourth topic is from camps to settlements. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to never have a permanent home, to be constantly on the move, following the seasons and the herds, with everything you own fitting on your back? For our early human ancestors, this was just life. The world was their home, and they were nomads, masters of adaptation and survival. But then, something incredible happened. A shift so profound it would change the course of human history forever. We stopped wandering. We started to settle. This is the story of how our restless ancestors laid down their roots and built the first communities. A journey from temporary camps to the dawn of civilization. Imagine this. You're part of a small band of hunters. Your life is a cycle of movement. You follow the migrating bison in the spring, head to the river for the summer Simone run, and gather nuts and berries in the autumn before hunkering down for the winter. Your home is a temporary shelter. Maybe a simple lean-to made of branches and animal hides. Easy to put up, and just as easy to take down. You know the land like the back of your hand, every trail, every stream, every hidden grove. But you don't own it. You pass through it. This was the reality for hundreds of thousands of years. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. In some special places, the world was exceptionally generous. Maybe it was a lush river valley where the soil was rich and wild grains grew in abundance. Or perhaps a coastal estuary teeming with fish, shellfish, and seals. Here, in these pockets of paradise, the need to constantly move lessened. Why leave when everything you need is right here? So, our ancestors started to linger. What was once a stay of a few weeks might stretch into a few months. The temporary camps became people began to invest a little more effort into their homes. The simple lean-to might be replaced by a sturdier pit house, dug a few feet into the ground for better insulation against the cold and heat. They might reinforce the walls with mud and stone. These weren't just shelters anymore. They were becoming homes, places to return to, places with a sense of permanence. As families stayed longer in one place, something magical happened. Communities began to form. Instead of just your immediate family, you now lived alongside your cousins, your in-laws, and other families who were also drawn to this bountiful spot. Living so close together required new rules and new ways of cooperating. You couldn't just do whatever you wanted anymore. You had to learn to get along, to share resources, and to resolve disputes peacefully. This new proximity sparked a revolution in social organization. Cooperation, which had always been important for hunting large game, now expanded into every aspect of life. People worked together to build stronger, more elaborate shelters. They might collaborate to construct a communal storage pit to protect their food surplus from pests and weather. Maybe they worked together to dig irrigation ditches to water the wild plants they were now tending to, a precursor to farming. With a larger group of people living together, not everyone had to do the same job. Specialization began to emerge. One person might be particularly skilled at making stone tools, becoming the village flint and knapper. Another might have a deep knowledge of plants and their medicinal properties, serving as a healer. Someone else might be a great storyteller, the keeper of the group's history and traditions. This division of labor made the entire community more efficient and resilient. If the hunt failed, the stored grains and the fish caught by others could see everyone through. This shift from a nomadic life to a settled one wasn't just about building houses or dividing up tasks. It was a fundamental change in the human psyche. For the first time, people developed a deep, lasting connection to a specific place. This land wasn't just a temporary stop, it was their home. Their ancestors were buried here. Their children were born here. The stories they told were woven into the landscape: the great oak tree where a hero stood, the bend in the river where a spirit was seen. They were literally putting down roots. Of course, this new way of life came with its own set of challenges. While community offered safety and support, it also created dependence. Nomads could simply move away from problems like disease, conflict, or a depleted resource. For settled people, that wasn't so easy. An outbreak of sickness could devastate a village. A failed harvest could mean starvation. And living so close to your neighbors meant that social tensions could easily boil over. The trash and waste that nomads simply left behind now piled up, creating sanitation problems they had never faced before. Furthermore, this attachment to place created a new concept: territory. This land was our land, and the resources on it were ours. This could lead to competition and conflict with other groups who might wander into their territory. The first walls and defensive structures weren't built to keep animals out, but to keep other people out. The birth of settlement was also, in some ways, the birth of organized warfare. Archaeologists can trace this monumental transition through the artifacts people left behind. They see the shift from small, scattered campsites to larger, denser settlements. They find heavier, less portable toolstings, like large grinding stones used for processing grains, which you would never dream of carrying on your back. They unearth the foundations of permanent houses, built to last for generations. They find cemeteries, clear evidence that people were staying in one place long enough to bury their dead and honor them for years to come. One of the most famous examples of this early settled life is the site of Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey. Around 12,000 years ago, long before the invention of agriculture or pottery, hunter-gatherers built this incredible complex of massive, elaborately carved stone pillars. Building it would have required the coordinated labor of hundreds of people over a long period. Why did they do it? The leading theory is that it was a regional gathering place, a ceremonial center. It suggests that the social and religious impulse to come together may have been one of the primary drivers for settlement. Even before the economic benefits were fully realized, people wanted to belong. This transition from wandering camps to permanent villages was not a single event, but a slow, uneven process that happened at different times in different parts of the world. But its impact was universal. It laid the groundwork for everything that followed: the development of agriculture, the rise of cities, the formation of governments, and the invention of writing. It was the moment we traded the freedom of the open road for the security of a community. We exchanged the vastness of the wilderness for a place to call our own. It was a risky bet, full of new dangers and new pressures. But it was a bet that ultimately paid off, setting us on the path to the complex world we live in today. So the next time you look out your window at your neighborhood, at the streets and houses, remember that it all started with a simple choice made by our distant ancestors thousands of years ago. The choice to stop, to stay, and to build something together. That decision to put down roots transformed not just the landscape, but transformed us, shaping the very essence of what it means to be human. The fifth topic is life after endless travel. For hundreds of thousands of years, our ancestors were wanderers, nomads without a permanent home. They moved with the seasons, followed the herds, and lived in a state of constant motion. Their world was vast, boundless, and defined by the journey, not the destination. Imagine that life for a moment, a life where your entire world is what you can carry, where the horizon is your only address. It was a life of incredible freedom, but also one of incredible hardship and uncertainty. Every day was a struggle for survival, a search for food, water, and shelter. But then, something extraordinary happened, a monumental shift that would forever alter the course of human history. We stopped moving. This wasn't a sudden event, but a slow, creeping revolution that unfolded over thousands of years across the globe. Perhaps it started with a particularly lush river valley, a place where the fish were plentiful and the soil was rich. Or maybe it was the discovery that certain seeds, when planted, would grow into reliable sources of food. Whatever the specific trigger, small groups of humans began to experiment with a radical new idea: staying put. They traded the open plains for a single, reliable patch of land. This simple choice to stop wandering was the single most important decision our species ever made. It was the moment we traded endless travel for a place to call home. And in doing so, we unwittingly laid the foundation for everything we know today. The world was about to be reborn. So what happens when a species built from ocean suddenly stands still? The immediate consequence was a revolution in food. Agriculture was born. Instead of chasing animals, we began to raise them. Instead of gathering wild plants, we started to cultivate them. For the first time, humans had a surplus of food. This sounds simple, but it was Earth. A food surplus meant we didn't have to spend every waking moment just trying not to starve. It meant security, stability, and predictability. But it also meant we were now tied to the land. Our fields needed tending. Our animals needed care. Our lives became governed by the rhythm of planting and harvesting, a cycle tied to a single location. The very concept of ownership began to take root. This land is our land. These crops are our crops. The nomadic mindset of sharing and moving on began to fade, replaced by a new, powerful instinct to protect what we had built. With a reliable food source and a fixed location, human populations exploded. Small, scattered bands of a few dozen people grew into villages of hundreds, then towns of thousands. And as these communities grew, they became more complex. Living in close quarters with so many people requires rules, organization, and leadership. We needed ways to resolve disputes, manage shared resources like water, and defend our new, valuable territory from outsiders. This was the birth of society as we know it. New roles emerged that were impossible in a nomadic group. Someone had to be a builder, a potter to store the grain, a weaver to make cloth. Someone had to be a leader, a priest to mediate with the gods, a soldier to protect the walls. Specialization began. No longer was everyone a jack of all. Instead, people started to master specific skills. This division of labor made our communities incredibly efficient and productive, driving a spiral of innovation. The shift from a nomadic to a settled lifestyle fundamentally rewired our brains and our cultures. For nomads, memory was oral. History was told through stories and songs, carried in the minds of the elders. But in a settled society, with complex transactions and growing populations, oral tradition wasn't enough. We needed a way to keep records: how much grain was in the storehouse, who owned which plot of land, what laws had been agreed upon. This practical need gave rise to one of humanity's greatest inventions: writing. It started with simple pictograms, representing objects, but quickly evolved into complex systems capable of expressing abstract ideas. Writing allowed knowledge to be stored, accumulated, and passed down with perfect fidelity. It was like giving humanity an external hard drive. We could now build upon the discoveries of previous generations in a way that was never before possible. This accelerated progress at an unimaginable rate. As villages grew into towns and towns into cities, the physical world we inhabited was transformed. We started to build for permanence. Our shelters were no longer temporary huts made of skins and branches, but sturdy houses made of mud, brick, stone, and wood. We built granaries to store our surplus, walls to defend our homes, and temples to honor our gods. We engineered irrigation canals to water our fields and roads, to connect our communities. For the first time, we weren't just living on the landscape. We were actively shaping it to suit our needs. This is the birth of architecture and engineering. The world was no longer a wild, untamed place we passed through. It was a canvas upon which we could project our ambitions and build a new, human-centric environment. The rise of cities was the ultimate expression of our commitment to staying put. These bustling hubs of trade, culture, and innovation became the engines of civilization. But this new world of structure and stability came at a cost. The boundless freedom of the nomad was replaced by the rigid structures of society. With ownership came inequality. Some people accumulated more land, more resources, and more power than others. Social hierarchies emerged, with kings and priests at the top and farmers and laborers at the bottom. The conflicts that were once small-scale skirmishes between rival bands escalated into organized warfare between cities and states, fought over land, resources, and power. New diseases also emerged. Living in dense, settled populations with domesticated animals created the perfect breeding ground for pathogens, leading to epidemics that could devastate communities. In many ways, the problems we grapple with today, social inequality, organized conflict, and pandemics, have their roots in this ancient decision to settle down. We traded one set of problems for another. The psychological impact of this transition was profound. A nomad's identity is tied to their kinship group and their journey. A settled person's identity became tied to a place, their city, their nation, their home. This created a powerful sense of belonging, but also an us versus them mentality. The world was no longer a shared space, but a mosaic of territories, each with its own people, customs, and gods. Our minds, once adapted for navigating vast landscapes and remembering the location of resources, had to adapt to navigating complex social hierarchies and remembering intricate laws and traditions. We developed new concepts like privacy, property, and inheritance. Our entire way of thinking about ourselves and our place in the world was fundamentally reconfigured. We became a new kind of human. So, when we look at our modern world debt, our sprawling cities, our globalized economy, our incredible technological achievements, and our complex social problems, are looking at the direct legacy of that moment, thousands of years ago, when we chose to stop wandering. Every skyscraper, every highway, every farm, and every national border is a testament to that decision. Our lives are defined by structure, by schedules, by property lines, and by the rules of the societies we've built. We've traded the freedom of movement for the security of a home. We've exchanged the uncertainty of the hunt for the predictability of the harvest. Was it a good trade? That's a question without an easy answer. The progress we've made is undeniable, but so are the problems we've created. Today, something interesting is happening. For the first time in 10,000 years, a small but growing number of people are choosing to rediscover a nomadic lifestyle, enabled by the very technology that settled life created. They are digital nomads, working from laptops in cafes around the world, living out of a suitcase, and embracing a life of movement. It's a fascinating echo of our distant past. It makes you wonder, is that ancient urge to wander still encoded in our DNA? A dormant instinct waiting to be reawakened? Perhaps the future of humanity won't be about choosing between movement and settlement, but about finding a new balance between the two. Perhaps we're on the verge of another great shift, another redefinition of what it means to be human. The story of our journey is far from over. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this journey through time, don't forget to like and subscribe for more.